Hi, everyone. Welcome to Live with Lucie and Michelle. Today, we're going to tackle the topic of how do we actually make time for self care? Because the number one thing I hear from moms left and right, moms I work with, moms is, I'm too busy. I have too much going on. So, Lucy and I thought we would tackle this and say, where do we start with this idea? Because a lot of it's in our heads because we tell ourselves we're too busy. Therefore, we are. Therefore, we don't have the time for it. If we tell ourselves we're not going to have it. So, what do you think on that, Lucy?
I certainly understand when women say that they're too busy because that's exactly where I was. When my kids were at home, I was too busy. That's just how I saw it. And I didn't ever invest that time in self care. Or if I did, it was, something that happened every month or every couple of months rather than something that was actually a daily practice. And I paid the price for that. And then I had to spend a lot of time after my kids left home dealing with a lot of things that I just never dealt with through all of those years that I neglected it. So, I mean, for me, that's a secret that nobody is really telling moms is the importance of self-care and that it doesn't have to be these big grand acts that we do every day. It's these little mindful moments that we build into our time, into our days, just so that we have that time just to recenter and ground ourselves.
I love how you said that it's those little moments because sometimes we think, oh, well, if I go get a pedicure or if I go get my hair done, that's me taking care of myself. And those are self care things. But I don't necessarily think that that's what we're talking. We're talking about those daily actions where you're putting yourself first and setting yourself up to have a great day. And yes, please do plan those massages, do plan those things to get out of the house and take time for yourself. But I think we're going to go a little bit deeper here in that we're looking at little moments, we're looking at little habits that we're creating for ourselves to really be mindful about how we go through our days, how we want things to be, and that we're making choices rather than letting life happen to us. Because I think that's where self care comes into is when we're starting to make decisions and deciding for ourselves what we want to do versus, oh, well, I create the schedule intentionally, even though you don't realize that you create these schedules with your kids' activities and everything in there. And if you're not planning yourself into that schedule, then you've intentionally taken yourself out of that without even realizing it because you booked it all up and just said, I'm too busy to do this. Or some of us, especially with that mom guilt, is like, I don't deserve to have that time for me. And so we want to take that back and say, yes, you deserve it. In fact, it is required of you to be a better mom.
And I'm going to say there's two optimal points in the day. Well, I'm going to say three, depending on, whether you're working outside the home or not. First thing in the morning is a great time, even if it's 15 minutes before everyone else gets up, whether you want to do a quick meditation or journal. The other, optimal time I would point out would be, half hour before you want to go to bed. Chances are your kids are in bed or they're in bedtime routine. Sure, it'd be easy to watch one more episode of whatever you're binging, but even if you were to power down half hour early, you're giving yourself that unwinding time before bed. But there's a third time that I think a lot of people overlook, and that's if you get a lunch break of some sort, is to be mindful with your lunch break. You don't necessarily have to spend it with your colleagues that you're spending the whole damn day with that are probably annoying the shit out of you anyways. There's no reason why you don't take your lunch, you walk down the street, you even if you go sit in your car with the windows open and read a book and just eat your lunch and just be quiet and still with yourself. I think those are really three major points in your day that you could find that you can work in some of this self-care time.
I like how you said lunchtime, but I was thinking from the stay-at-home mom perspective. Well, a lot of you have that nap time, but then you
Yes.
feel like you have to do laundry or do dishes or do
Oh, that's when you
something.
go into mega mode where you're like, how
Right.
much can I get done in 2 hours? And you're like running around like the Tasmanian devil. I used to do it too. Absolutely.
So I would say take 10. I mean, you don't have to take the whole entire nap time, but if you take 10 to 15 minutes of that intentionally to do something like journaling or getting outside and just being by yourself in nature while your child's sleeping, but to intentionally do it, I think that's what it really comes down to. Is, as Lucy's pointing out, different times of day that it's easier for moms to do it, and it's really that intentionality behind it because we do And again, it doesn't have to be, I have a full hour routine before the kids get up and this has to be done or my day's going to be all messed up, because that's also problematic, right? We are moms. My daughter has woken me up, I think the last five, normally don't, but we were camping, and like the last 5 nights in a row, I've been woken up 3 to 4 times. And then so haven't been in that realm for a while, but I understand, especially those of you with little babies, like it is like, it stirs with your head and makes you do things differently. And let's not deny that, right? But what we can do is, before we go take care or respond to that child, that we take 2 deep breaths for ourselves, that we take, so the baby's crying, well, center yourself for 30 seconds before you run over there. Like, it's these intentional little moments that we say we don't have time for, but when we just start to make those more of a habit, giving back to ourselves a little bit before we go, that we're actually able to respond better to the situation. The crying kid, all of a sudden we have 5 more minutes of patience than we did before we took those two deep breaths, right? So that's what the self-care is helping you do, is making more of a response time than just always like, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go rush into they're fighting, I'm going to go take care of this. All of a sudden then all of a sudden you have no reserve. So all of a sudden you start to get all anxious and angry, and all of a sudden, before long, your mama bear like claws out, ready to go, and then all of a sudden it just makes the situation worse. So when we're talking about self-care, we're like, how do we dissipate? How do we go into situations more effectively throughout our day? And of course, we're not perfect. It's not going to always happen, but can we make more of them?
Yeah, and that's it, is that, when you're sort of talking about it, getting in between 2 kids that are arguing or fighting or whatever, 30 seconds isn't going to make that much of a difference. It really isn't. I mean, sure, just listening to that, everything in you is screaming, just shut up. Just please stop. Just please stop, But 30 extra seconds, or I remember there was one day when her kids were in the back seat of the car, and my husband was driving. We're sitting there, and they were just like bickering and carrying on, and we just got tired of it, so we just kept turning up the radio. we just sat there laughing. We're like, whatever. We turn up there, and finally they're like, that's too loud, and we're like, yeah, well, we're sick of listening to you, so either shut up or we're going to keep it this loud. And guess what? It worked.
Well, I love that, because again, like, they're going to do those things, and like they're going to have tantrums. But it's, how do we respond to them? Because I've done that too with the radio. The 2 of them are just blasting like, that's too loud. Exactly. And or also, though, I've braced myself and like held my hands really tight when I heard the fighting in the other room, going like, listening. I share, like, listening, how bad is it getting? But like, every time that I go in there, the quicker I go in there, the more they expect it as well. And they're not going to try to problem solve themselves. And so it's listening to, how bad is it getting? Do I need to do anything yet? Or should I wait a little bit longer? Because half the time I've noticed, the more like I wait minutes, I'm like standing like earshot, waiting, but like calming myself as well, but listening, like, can they solve this themselves? And honestly, half of the time they have, because I was patient enough and didn't just rush in there. And it's having those moments where we're like using our tools of how do we, our goal is to get them to figure this out for themselves, because we're not there at the school playground. If they can't start to do this with their siblings where you can help and facilitate, then how are they going to do it when you're not there? And so the more we keep giving them opportunities while you're in the background, the more self-sufficient they're going to be.
And that's, you raised a really good point there. I was raised in a house where there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of arguing and fighting and that type of thing. So for me, when, my kids started getting to that age, I wanted to do anything I could to fix that. I just didn't want that type of tension in my house. And I think it was sort of to the other extreme where, I was constantly trying to avert things. And like you said, end those arguments and solve these problems and do everything. But what you end up doing is you end up putting a lot more stress on yourself, but you're also not allowing the other people involved, as you said, to discover their own inner strength or their own problem solving capabilities. You're not allowing them to have their journey. So it is a bit of a balance, when you're talking about that aspect of parenting. And it's as much about your own self-discovery as it is allowing your children to, discover for themselves. And there's one thing that I've been encouraging myself to say when these types of conflicts come up or if problems arise, instead of trying to jump in and solve the problem, it's just by asking the question, how can I help?
I love
Because
that.
then you're showing that you're there supporting and that you don't want the shenanigans to go on, but you're also giving them the power to communicate what they feel the problem is and how it can be resolved. It's just another tactic. Admittedly, I've been a mom for um 25 years now, so I've had a little bit of practice. Only 2 kids. But yeah, it's as much about your own self-discovery and personal growth as it is theirs, for sure.
Well, I mean, as a mom, we don't want them to suffer. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if we shelter them from everything, how are they going to be when we're not there? And that's what I've been seeing a lot of from other moms with college age kids, or stuff that the kids don't know how to self-regulate themselves. And so part of what we're doing is, first of all, learning how to self-regulate ourselves and being that model for the kids, and then giving them the opportunity. I love how you said, how can I help, which is great, which is perfect for arguments. Also the same thing is when they're having problems that they come to you with at school or stuff. And sometimes we know as women that our husbands will try to problem solve and fix it. And how do you feel when they do that? But then now you're doing that to your kid, because that's what you want to do, is like, you don't want them to go through that.
Sometimes you just want to listen somebody to listen to you bitch, and that's it.
And they want the same thing. And so if
Yeah.
you don't offer that, so a lot of times they'll be like, do you want my help? Do you want me to contact a parent? Do you want me to do anything? Do you want to just talk? Do you want me to listen? Do you want to finish this? Or cause especially with my middle daughter, she doesn't always want to, like, it's in stages.
Mm.
So like, she'll come to me for a little bit, share a little bit. She's like, okay, I'm done. And then like 25 minutes later or an hour later, she's like, okay, I have more I want to get off my chest. So it's like, it's really trying to be that detective and figure out how to serve that child the best. But again, our goal is to get them to be self-sufficient with this stuff and regulate themselves. And so we're there to kind of be their coaches and support and help when needed, but also not to always just jump in and try to fix it, because you got to think about how it is when your spouse does that or a
And
friend even.
that's a sort of another sort of area perspective that I have, is that my oldest son lives in a house with a bunch of other roommates, and he's noticed a big difference between how he can handle things versus how the other roommates can handle things, and they don't have that. You hear a lot of jokes being made about millennials, and you know what? From what I've seen of other kids out there, they deserve a lot of those jokes because they just, they're snowflakes. But I don't necessarily blame them, and it's not that I want to blame us as the parents, but I remember when reading an article when my oldest was maybe 3 or 4. And this was back when parenting, where we were told we have to encourage our kids in everything and praise them and shower them and all of this stuff. And you know what? Didn't take me long to realize that was exhausting and it was dumb as shit. And I just didn't want to deal with it. And it was not long after that that I read an article where they're talking about the dangers of doing that and how we were actually raising what they called the bubble wrap generation. It was because we were trying to protect them too much. We were trying to do too much. And they're cautioning us because they're like, basically, when your kids become teenagers and young adults, they're not going to have the skills that they need to praise themselves or to, make sure that they get their own task done or anything like that, because they always had that person there for them. And I've seen how that bubble wrap generation has grown up, and it did not do them any favors. It certainly didn't. And in some ways, I wondered if I was a little bit too hard on our kids, because I don't know, a lot of this mamby-pambiness that was going on with parenting, it's not that long ago, it just didn't make sense to me. And I saw other parents doing it, and I felt a little bit guilty because I'm like, am I just being too tough on my kids? But now that they're old enough to know why I did the things that I did, they're like, "Oh no. No, we're glad
You
because
were tough enough.
we're like miles ahead of other people, even like the simplest things." And it was like my kids, by the time they were 12, they had to do their own laundry. guess what? They know how to do their own laundry now. They know how to feed themselves. I used to make them go grocery shopping, things like that, that it made them self-sufficient. So, anything that you can do to help your kids adult more, it's never too early to learn certain adulting skills, trust me.
No, it definitely isn't. And I know why sometimes we don't is because it's easier just to do it for them. And
Yeah.
so what I suggest on that note is pick moments where like for instance, when my son was first learning how to cook, or make elaborate meals, I should say, because he loves to cook. I knew that it would take like 4 hours, like to get from start to finish, right? To like get through everything, like plan that out. I'm like, I'm not gonna do that on a weeknight. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do that on a Sunday afternoon. End of story. And it's gonna take a couple Sunday after, it's gonna take time on those days till it gets done, till he's able to be self-sufficient. But you got to plan that out and know it's gonna take 3 to 4 hours. Like teaching them to use laundry for the first time isn't gonna be like, oh, here you go, let's, it's gonna take time. So, but it's scheduling that time in and not doing it when you're busy. Again, we're getting back to the idea of time for yourself and self-care, is that we want our kids to learn that as well. Because again, we're talking about that bubble wrap generation. You're now looking for external validation for everything.
Yeah.
And the only place that you really should get that is internally. And we struggle with that. We all do. But again, that comes with the self-care of you moms starting it off and doing and saying, I need this for myself so I can validate myself and my needs, and then showing my kids how to do that as well. That because especially once they get to school and with all the popularity and everything, and I see my daughter struggling because she wants to be more tomboy, and just that some of the girls are like, well, why aren't you dressing more this way? She's like, because I'm happy with who I am. And so the more we can do that and then do that for them, and that all comes from the self-care and figuring out who we are, because at times, especially with moms, is we got this big role and then we kind of lost ourselves because we have no time. We put them all into a schedule and forget about ourselves. Well, the self-care is about who you are and doing those things that you're inspiring your kids to do that as well. And that's where the self-care comes in. And again, it's not that it has to be, I love how you put the 3 times a day. So picking times in those, and sometimes it's just 5 minutes each of those times, but giving yourself that setup to really figure out the things that inspire you. So if writing things down, getting those things out of your head really helps. And journaling is probably something you want to do. And it doesn't have to be long, or like could be a sentence just to get you started. Like again, these are starting places to keep moving forward. As long as we're moving forward, working towards understanding first of all who we are and how we can help our kids better. Our goals as parents, right? We want them to be happy, healthy adults, but they can't be if they don't see that. They don't have a role model for that.
Yeah, and I think, I think it is sort of an obscure part of self-care is, what we're reflecting back to our kids in our own self-care, but also in allowing them to grow at what is appropriate for their age and stage of where they are. I was certainly that mom who did so much because you know what? It was just easier to do it myself because I just couldn't be bothered. I was so stressed. I was so tired because I didn't have any other outlets for myself that I would rather just get it done myself because then I didn't have to deal with any of the other BS. And again, I was shooting myself in the foot. I'm not speaking any of this because I did it right. I think I did so many things wrong and I learned from them. And that's part of, why I do what I do is because I can sit there and say that, these are the reasons why you don't want to do it. And I know from experience. And I think that's really when it comes to self-care and, what we're really not saying about it is that it really allows us to grow into a better version of ourselves. If that makes sense, that you're actually depriving yourself of something if you're not engaging in some form of self-care because you're not giving yourself that headspace to either decompress or to learn and to grow, to reflect, be introspective, all of these things. And, for anyone listening or watching that thinks, okay, great, well, what do I do with my 10 minutes? I'm going to give you the easiest suggestion. Do what I call vomiting on a page. Some people call it journaling. You just take out a piece of paper, and whatever voice in your head is saying, just start scratching it on a piece of paper. Even though you're saying it in your head, something happens when you put it on paper. It's almost like you're emptying the garbage can. And you vent it all on. And, if you're on your lunch hour and your coworkers are annoying you and you write it all out, you just have to tear it into a few pieces of paper, put it through the letter shredder. No, you don't have to keep it. You don't have to do anything with it, but get it out, because there's something transformative that happens when you're getting those thoughts out of your head and onto a piece of paper. You start to see patterns or observe things about yourself, and you start to it's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. And that's when those sort of moments of growth happens. You sort of go, oh, am I doing that because of this reason? Or are they doing this because of this? It may take several times of you doing it, but you'll get there. And so if you're just looking for the quickest, easiest self-care to start in 10 minutes a day, just vomit on a page. It's somewhere.
I love that, because we are in our heads, we are the meanest to ourselves.
Oh,
and so
God, yeah.
Get those thoughts on paper, and then it kind of takes the power out of them. But if we keep them in our heads, just circling over and over and over again, that's how we just keep beating ourselves up. And so getting them out on the paper is a great way for self-care, just to start releasing that processes, because we are just so mean to ourselves in our heads. And it's asking yourself, would you talk to a friend like that? And looking at the paper in front of you is no, I wouldn't. And so working towards making that connection that I am lovable. I do love myself. I do like myself, getting to that point, because that's how we shine. Figuring out what are our positive traits and projecting them into the world, and projecting them at our kids and inspiring them as well.
And it's all just part of the journey. I think a lot of people mistake journaling or self-care that there's some destination in there. It's just one element in the journey. It continuously evolves and changes, and you do too as you go through it.
I love that. Well, Lucie, how can people get in touch with you if they would like to?
The best place to get in contact with me is through my website, therollercoasterpodcast.com. Through there, you can listen to my podcast, read my blogs, connect with my social media, or you can even pop me an email. I love getting emails, so make sure you connect with me.
And you can find me on connectingmamas.com. And I actually have on the very front page a free gift that goes perfect with today's talk, is how to get your mornings restart in 1 minute. And so I'll give you great ideas on that. And I'll also put a bonus in there for starting your morning with your kids as well, and getting that a little bit more organized as we're going into summer. We'll be getting a new school year soon. We can have that refresh and start that over. And we'll be back again next week, because Lucie and I just like chatting, and whatever we can do to support you. Be sure to throw comments or anything or anything else you would like to know more about. We'd love to hear and answer any of your questions you have out there. Bye for now.